Podcast. I'm Dan Albano with the Orange County Register and OCVarsity.com, and we're joined once again by our Trinity League insider, Scott Barajas, as we are looking at Week 10 of the Trinity League season, the final week of the regular season, final round in the Trinity League. So we are got a lot to talk about. Playoff scenarios are going to be on our topic tonight. We're going to have reviews from Week 9, which delivered another thrilling game in the Trinity League. And, of course, we're going to be previewing this week's final round of Trinity League games, as always. So, a lot to get to tonight. It is a wonderful time for high school football fans. Week 10 is always a great week. The draw is coming out very soon. This Sunday, in fact, the playoff pairings will be announced, and there will be a lot of coverage on OCVarsity and the Orange County Register. And to help us break it all down and get us some inside information on this last kick, we have Scott Barajas with us. And Scotty, how you doing tonight?
I'm good, Dan. You know, like you said, that Week 10's here. Season's flying by. I can't recall a season that went this fast. You know, I don't know if it's because we, week by week we're doing these podcasts, but the season's gone by. And last week we saw Modern Day wrap up back-to-back undefeated titles. And I think that last time they did that was the 97-98 season. We thought Bosco and JSerra game was going to be for second and third this week, but obviously that didn't happen. And it looks like Santa Margairta is going to probably secure that third spot with the win, and then Olu, we're looking at them becoming the first winless Trinity League team, which I know they don't want to be. So
yeah.
So we just have to. That's what we got on tap for this week.
Right, and those Monarchs are not. They still got to win one more to be 5-0 once again before they're undefeated. But
very true.
Is it maybe there's some history in having consecutive league titles in a row, right? That's probably significant.
Yeah.
But as we work our way through our show, I want to give a quick thank you on behalf of Scotty and I. It's for all the Trinity League football fans that have been joining us all year and over the years now, as we've been doing our Trinity League podcast in our third season. Next week's show is going to be our last show for 2017 high school football season, and we're going to have a playoff preview. We're going to have our final Trinity League grades for the season, and we're gonna preview and review. We'll preview the playoffs and review Week 10, but we're also going to have our postseason awards. So it's going to be a jam-packed show next week, and we go into that. Talk about the first round. We expect all 6 Trinity League teams to be playing in that postseason, but we'll talk about that toward the end of the show tonight. But before we get to that, let's start off talking about Week 9. It was another great week, and like we said, it produced another thrilling game. We're going to start at the game that I covered for the Register in OCVarsity, and I had a great time down at JSerra, and it was just another barn burner between JSerra and Santa Margairta, the two South County rivalries. The two South County rivals hooked up. It was Santa Margairta winning in dramatic fashion in the final 30 seconds, 36-35. Eagles scored on a run play and went for the 2-point conversion, not the tie. They didn't go for overtime. Coach Rich Fisher played for the win. They ran a play out of a timeout, threw it to Jake Peters, their fine tight end. Some misdirection, a throwback play from Josiah Norwood to the other side of the field, away from that the motion, and Santa Margairta celebrated a sweet win because they had the heartbreaking losses to Mission Viejo, St. John Bosco in that would have been Week 8, just the previous week. They beat the rival. They look at the Lions as somebody they can really compete with. That's their South County team. They're close in proximity. They think they have equal kind of talent, similar teams. It's not a super team like Modern Day, a defending Division I champion like Bosco with all those athletes and speed. This was JSerra. This was a game they wanted to get desperately, and they got it. Scotty, what's your thoughts on this game?
Yeah, you know what? For the second week, Santa Margairta makes a second half comeback,
right.
But this time, they're on that winning side. So, for a while it looked like JSerra was going to come away with this one, the Eagles and Chad Magar just wouldn't be denied.
Yeah.
Magar had 224 yards rushing. He seemed to put the team on his back and just willed to win, putting up big play after big play. And I think he certainly earned a first-team All-League and a first-team All-County.
Oh, Scotty.
So I'll throw out that one now. So, and especially on a night where the Josiah Norwood was actually held in check with -5 yards rushing, and it was probably his least productive passing game at 48% for 188.
Right.
And JSerra did get after it with the skeleton crew, as Fisher, Calvin Musette, Muno McLean, and two-way starter, Chris Castillo were out with injury. And then it was Eli Jefferson who picked up the slack with the surprising 227 yards performance of his own to match Magar. But it was that gutsy call at the night, by Fisher to go for the win instead of the potential, OT, and the Eagles, they put it in, and I sure don't want to be matched up or have anybody be matched up with Santa Margarita come playoff time, because you're going to have to play 4 quarters and you're not going to be able to relax, because these Eagles have been able to come marching back when down. So
they really, like you said, you can't relax when you play Santa Margarita. I think that's well said, because they got an outstanding running back that you're going to have to deal with, a good offensive line. Josiah's very mobile. I think he's improved on his passing. They've developed some, Malone Matele had an outstanding game receiver. Really, he had a deep 54-yard touchdown. They're getting their tight ends involved, like we mentioned, Jake Peters. Some of the other receivers have come along. Mark Eaton, Jake Ebach have come along. They throw a lot to Magyar out of the backfield. They have the great special teams that we've chronicled, and their defense is pretty scrappy at times. And obviously they gave, like you said, they gave up some yards. They gave up a lot of yards, but it's not a bad defense. It's still solid by our high school standards. So, did we get your grades on this game, Scotty?
Yeah, so I gave Santa Margarita a B+. I gave them a C+ on defense, and JSerra gave a B+ on offense, and the defense C+.
Yeah. So
they both battled, they both put up points, they both gave up points. So it was just a great game if you're a fan of high school football, but tough heartbreak loss if you're a JSerra fan.
Yeah, on the flip side for JSerra, it was obviously, Eli Jefferson was a plus, like you said, running for the 3 touchdowns, including a 73-yarder. It's got great burst on speed. We've seen it on kickoffs. We've talked about him. But it really spoke to JSerra's got an outstanding offensive line. But they were, that unit and the team in whole definitely were plagued once again by penalties. They had a very difficult time with penalties, about 15 penalties for about 150, 175 yards. And it did cost them, like Coach Harlow thought it was going to cost them at some point. It cost them on Santa Margarita's game-winning drive in the last 5.5 minutes. They marched about 80 yards for that winning touchdown, and there was a 4th and 1. Deep in JSerra territory. Santa Margarita called timeout. They're going for it on 4th and 1, and they're down. They're down by a touchdown or so, obviously, and they call timeout. And how did they get that first down? They got JSerra to jump. And Scotty, it really looked like that was the play to come out and get to get JSerra to jump. Unbelievable.
Yeah, that's discipline at its best, but it's hard when you're ramped up and wanting to get the start, but coming out of that timeout, they had to tell him, watch the ball, don't jump, and sure enough, that's what happened. So, but yeah.
Exactly. Now I want to pass on some news I have on the injury updates on JSerra. So the fine junior wideout, speedy guy, that would have been added such a dimension to this JSerra attack this year, but the good news is he's back next year. Munar McLean, he's out for the year with a knee. So that's according to Coach Harlow. So Castillo and Al Fisher, who did not play in this game, both were in both have ankles, and they were in walking boots. And I think you could perhaps see them against Bosco this week. We'll see, especially Al Fisher. But we'll just have to see about. I thought I heard Calvin's name called. Musette was called in that game, but you might have some info that I didn't have. But that's their big three as far as injuries.
Okay, I thought I saw him on the sideline not suited up, so I thought he was out. So.
Okay. And then another interesting development. Also, you speak of the Santa Margarita sideline. I did spot former JSerra football coach Jim Hardigan on the Santa Margarita sideline in some Santa Margarita blue. So that was an interesting sight to see. Haven't seen him in the Eagles colors in some years.
Yeah, that is.
So let's move on, Scotty, to the game that you were at last week in Week 9 of the Trinity League season, and it was Mater Dei taking on Orange Lutheran. They played back at Santa Ana Stadium. So Mater Dei's been on the road a lot this year, so they're playing their last 3 games at home, and it was Mater Dei 51-21. So Mater Dei gets that offense revved up again. They hadn't scored that many points in a couple weeks, if I'm not mistaken. And the Mater Dei, they were at 34 points at halftime, and then they added 2 touchdowns in the third quarter. Then they silenced the hit the brakes a little bit. But again, another big story for Mater Dei was J.T. Daniels. The reigning Register Offensive Player of the Year, had another huge game. 24-33 for 5 TDs, no picks, threw for over 300 yards, and he was really and 3 of those touchdowns were to Amon-Ra St. Brown. And but Scotty, you were at that game, so no need for me to continue too much on this game. What did you see? What were your grades out of this game?
Yeah, you know what? This game, the outcome was to be expected. I think I was a touchdown off of my, picking the actual score, so I was real close. But Olu, I think the main thought on this going into this game was how many sacks, MD's front 7 was going to get, But Olu came into this game with a solid game plan. They went with the short game. Helinski took the snap and fired it. He never stayed in the pocket, and he never took more than a 2-step drop. And he was still getting pressure, and then Mater Dei ended up, recording 5 sacks, and they had 6 hurries on him. Logaleo added a sack and a half to his total, and he's up to 12 now. Genova added the half sack. Samuela Talimakahaka had, and Austin Folio had a sack apiece.
Okay.
And the defense held Olu to negative 10 yards rushing, and it was obvious that they weren't going to run the ball, and then add in the sack. So that's how they ended up getting the negative yards rushing. But Helinski did throw for 248. He had the 3 touchdowns, but he wasn't reading much. He was pretty much going with his first read and firing away. And if it wasn't covered, he would sling it out of bounds. And when he did connect, he hit Kyle Ford 10 times, who put up 100 yards receiving, but he only had like a 10-yard average. And the one catch he did have was a 20-yard TD fade in the end zone. And, that was pretty much, the story. Olu couldn't do much without Ford or Loya. Loya, it was the other recipient. He caught 7 balls for 87 yards and 2 touchdowns. And they just couldn't match score for score. As JT put up 5 TDs. 3 of them, like you said, went to Amon-Ra. Amon finished 8 for 122 on the night. Nico had 4 for 61 and a touchdown, including a diving one-handed deflection TD. The ground game was led by Chris Street. He ran for 70 yards on 7 carries, still keeping his 10-yard per carry on the season.
Yeah.
And then on a side note, Olu was playing without its starting cornerbacks. JoJo Hawkins and JoJo Forrest were out with injury, so it was former JSerra star Thomas Huff making his first start at one of the corners. But whoever was out there wasn't going to stop JT or the outcome on this one. And Mater Dei went A and an A on offense and defense, and Olu was C- on defense and offense.
Okay. Now, before we hit the last game of Week 9, let's update our standings a little bit after that report from Scotty. Mater Dei now perfect, 9-0 overall, 4-0 in Trinity League. Like Scotty said, they've clinched at least a share of their second consecutive Trinity League title and with that victory against Bosco head-to-head, they would be the number 1 seed out of the league anyway. So, like we said, Mater Dei 9-0 overall, 4-0 in the Trinity League. Bosco is in second place right now, 3-1 in league, 7-2. They got the loss to Mater Dei, and then they lost their opener in Florida against Aquinas. And then tied for third, but of course the head-to-head, there's a break here. Santa Margarita is 2-2, JSerra is 2-2, tied for third, but of course Santa Margarita just beat JSerra. And continuing league, so down to fifth with a two-way tie for third, we go down to fifth. It's Servite 1-3, 6-3, and then 0-4. Like Scotty said, maybe Oulu's the first winless team in the Trinity League. They're 0-4, 5-4 overall. So let's wrap up the last game of the night, and that was St. John Bosco taking on Servite. And this one had some interesting history because when they hooked up in 2016, it was one of the most lopsided scores of the season. It was 70-6 in favor of the Bosco Braves, and we both thought it wasn't going to be that bad this year, and we were right. It was 42-17, and at halftime it was 28-17. So there it is, Servite hanging tough, but they didn't have anything in the second half. Bosco didn't have too much either, but they did blank them 14-0, and that's what will do it. The young sophomore DJ, the quarterback for St. John Bosco, he is firmly entrenched right now. People are wondering about what's happening. DJ is the quarterback, it appears. He's continued to have great games. He threw for 320 yards and 4 TDs. The previous week against Santa Margarita, he threw for a school record 400 and some change. And then he made his debut against Mater Dei, and as Scotty said, he was pretty solid. Scotty said he projects to be out, just to get better. And they got George Halani running again on offense, running for 200 yards plus. But Scotty, what was your breakdown of this game? You got a good feel of Bosco, I'd say, and Servite, but you have some good intel on Bosco.
Yeah, with this one, like you said, it was played out as we thought, they pretty much put up another prime passing performance. DJ, and I'm going to try his name, Unga Lunga Alehi.
All right.
So there we go. I've been trying to practice on that. And the more we say it, the more we'll get it. So,
okay.
But
good job.
Yeah. So Halani came back. So they put up some big total yards on Servite, and DJ connected with 10 different receivers.
Wow. With
Colby Bowman, the recent Stanford commit.
Oh, okay.
As a leading pass catcher, he had 5 for 88 yards and a TD. And like we said, the Bosco defense held Servite scoreless to the second half. They contained TJ McMahon, holding him to 160 passing with 1 touchdown, and they picked him off once. But, TJ managed to get 97 yards rushing with
right.
the 1 score. But, and DeLon Hurt was probably the lone bright spot, hauling in 7 catches for 127 yards and a TD. And then there was the report, and I heard this from a good source out there, saying that Servite lost more than a few guys, that got banged up. So we'll have to check to see who got hurt or if anybody is going to be out next week. But
okay.
This is a tough time of the year. We've seen a lot of multiple players and teams having to battle that injury adversity, going into the last week before the playoffs begin. But like we said, I don't know, but I mean, I've heard from others, close colleagues or close fans that Bosco's, they'd be putting up good numbers, but they're also causing, creating penalties and making mistakes, and it's keeping them from, maybe, putting away teams early instead of later. So, but, I think from what we've all seen, I think, like we said, I think Bosco is just going to be one of those tough teams in the playoffs, and their passing game is going to be hard to tackle. So,
all right. So what are your grades on this game, Scotty?
So Servite C-, offense, defense C-, excuse me, Bosco A-, and defense an A.
A on defense.
A on defense.
And A- on
the second half.
Yeah, exactly. Well, hopefully the Servite Flyers are okay. As we just talked about JSerra, they're nursing some injuries after playing Mater Dei. They had 4 guys hobbled in the first quarter, and then they had a bunch of guys out and lost some guys. I can say Santa Margairita's healthy. Very healthy. I know Mater Dei had a scare, but it's with Nico, but he's okay. So that's good. I think Mater Dei is pretty healthy. And whether I haven't heard much about Bosco as far as injuries. And like you mentioned, a couple guys from Orange Lutheran. Hopefully those guys are back, because JoJo Forrest, JoJo Hawkins, those are key players, especially Hawkins offensively too. But I guess the 2 banged up teams, it sounds like, are JSerra and Servite, and maybe Olu.
Yeah, I mean that's off of just a report that I got, and I tried to follow up on it, but I couldn't. I had by the time we've had done this broadcast, I hadn't heard back yet. So.
Okay. Well, let's look at these Week 10 games, and then we will conclude the show with talking about some playoff updates and a couple things that we're going to be watching this week. Let's start with, I think, a pretty interesting game, and we're going to keep it with the Braves. So Week 10, on November 3rd, calendar changes to November 3rd, Friday, the Braves hit the road, and they're going down to JSerra, playing 7 o'clock on a Friday night. I think this could be a tricky game for the Braves, because you just have to look at the comparative scores and some of the recent history. The Braves just went down 2 weeks ago to they just played Santa Margairita, and that game was at El Camino. But they just played Santa Margairita, and that was a barn burner, 40-38 in favor of the Braves. So I have no reason to think that with an experienced quarterback, 3-year starter like Matt Robinson, Tariq Luckett out there, if they can run the ball, we'll see about the penalties. I think they can play a lot cleaner than they do. We'll see how they can fare on defense. They have some physicalness that they still have. Malik McLean, who's got another sack. He's probably at 13 or so sacks, maybe even 14. Sean Nielsen's playing well on the defensive line. A guy who looks good to me was Victor Canton, who I think you've mentioned a few times, Scotty, as a physical guy. So they have some elements. I'm not sure about their secondary, but I think this could be a tricky game. I'm predicting the Braves are going to win, but I think this could be a very competitive game.
Yeah, we're gonna. This will be one that I think we're gonna go against on. So, I thought about that too, but I think JSerra's a little bit banged up.
Okay.
I think Bosco's finally has kind of like dialed it in what they want to do. I know we said this game was still supposed to be like for the second or third place, which is still kind of can be. Then it would be determined by coin flips. But it seems to me that this game's more of a survival game for JSerra. Because like they're seem to be limping into this one, and Bosco's seem to finally figure their offensive identity. I think JSerra's going to have to play a perfect game and cut the penalties down, and they're going to have to capitalize on the Bosco mishaps to have a shot. Watch for the Braves. I think they're going to take away Tariq Luckett, who's their only deep threat. And if Fisher can't go and if he can't run, it's going to add challenging trying to run the ball against another tough front, because I mean they could run the ball in Mater Dei, and I know Bosco's front's just as equally as tough as Mater Dei's, so that's going to be challenging in itself. And I think Bosco's passing game and their speed's going to put up big numbers again. So I think they're going to go out big on this one, and I'm going to go out on this and say 52-14.
Oh, wow. I'd be surprised if that happened, but that's where we disagree. I think it's going to be closer. I'm picking the Braves too, but I think it will be I think JSerra gets within 2 touchdowns. They're within. I don't know if they're within. I think they can get within 13 or less. But one thing that's interesting with I thought for JSerra, Matt Robinson showed more scrambling ability and use his legs more against Santa Margarita, and that was effective. And if he can do that without getting taking some hits, he's got some great wheels. He's very fast, and I think that. I think the more he can do that in certain situations, if they can scheme to get him a few more running plays, that would be outstanding. He does a lot of his work on the outside, but he helps them out. Tyler Shiramura is really a nice receiver. I think he's a junior, Scotty. I've liked him. He's a really good high school player, and he helps their receiving core. But you're right. They certainly could use Munar or somebody else on that way. Not a lot of Tristan West wasn't featured at receiver, and if they could find somebody else, that would be amazing. But we will see how it goes. I think JSerra will play well. But let's move on to the next game here. We're gonna go Santa Margarita taking on Orange Lutheran. This game's at Trabuco Hills on Friday, the 3rd. So this is the game. Santa Margarita, if they can win this, they can get 3rd place. And one of the videos that we heard from Coach Fisher after the game was he was talking about how he was so. He was talking to the boys. He was so fired up. But he made a reference in there, Scotty, about how, hey, we're right on track. We're right where we want to be. We're not done yet. We win that game next week, we're right where we want to be. So I think he's, looking at that 3rd place. They've had it kind of eyed it for a while. They're going to get a certain kind of playoff draw. You would think the 3rd place team from the Trinity League would get a great draw. Should be better than the 4th and 5th, of course. So this would make their record 7-3, 3-2. I think they can get it, Scotty. They're just so complete. They play real fast. They compete. They have great special teams as well. So I think they're a lot for Orange Lutheran to deal with, and Lancers, coming off playing, obviously Mater Dei. Then they lost the heartbreaker to Servite in week 8. They just have had a tough stretch where they had a tough go against Servite, and then they opened with Bosco. I know it'd be total gut check for them to avoid a 5-game losing streak, but Margarita's just rolling.
Yeah, on this one, they're like you said, they're just rolling after those back-to-back thrilling games, and it appears like Olu's chances at this one is probably to be in a shootout, or hope that they can get the ball to their receivers, because Santa Margarita isn't the strong pass defense team. Their secondary is probably their weakest link on the defense, but they are known to show that they won't back down and they won't give up to the end. So, Olu's going to have to stretch the field, and they can't nickel and dime down the field like they did in against Mater Dei. They're going to have to score points, and they're going to have to score more than their league average. Get this, Olu is only averaging 22 points a game in league.
Right.
And, that's way down. So, I think Olu knows they can't run the ball, and they're just going to live and die by the pass. But I think Santa Margarita is going to come away with this one 45-28.
That's a good stat, Scotty, on the Olu offense, because in non-league, they were scoring 30 and 40 consistently. Remember the score, La Mirada, 35-0, and then it was easy, Cathedral, 37-0, right? And then they scored 40 on Vista Marietta, and they scored 40 again against Norco. And then they had that, their kind of showcase game. It was that Heritage game. Heritage, it's only lost at Romo Land, a Division 2 team, I believe, and that was 34-21. But now, they haven't broke 30. They got 28 against Servite and lost by a point. And I thought for sure they were going to do it against JSerra. I was at that game, and they were on fire, and then they nothing in the second half. And so it's going to be tough for their playoff draw. And but they don't have the balance. But they still got some weapons. They get some of those guys healthy. Maybe they can. They're going to be a prideful group. They're really talented players, but I think they're just. And they might mix it up with Santa Margarita in that first half. But like you said, I think you said it right. You're going to have to play 4 quarters and right down to the end. And Santa Margarita knows how to play those fourth quarter games. They've been in those games against Bosco, Santa Margarita, Mission Viejo, 3 great teams. So, well, here's another game, and I'll share a projection with everybody on this one. So Mater Dei is playing host. They're the home team this year against their rival Servite. This is one of the best rivalries in Orange County. It's probably the number 1 rivalry in Orange County. The most impassionate game. Doesn't really matter what the team's records are, or you just kind of throw it out the book. These teams really have really spirited fan bases. The teams really get up for it. There's been all kinds of documentaries about this series. Maybe, Edison Fountain Valley is a great rivalry too, and there's some great ones in Orange County history. But the hottest one probably going right now definitely seems to be, Mater Dei Servite last, several years. But Cal Prep projects this one to be a victory for the Monarchs, 50-14. I think it will be lopsided victory for Mater Dei. They just have, so much firepower for everybody, and they have some outstanding defensive players that can make life tough for the Friars. I think the Friars will make some plays. They have, they'll break something here and there, and McMahon hasn't. Nobody's really slowed down McMahon's running ability. Every podcast we talking about him getting another touchdown against some good teams, so he'll get something. Like you mentioned, DeLon Hurd. He's a handful for a young Mater Dei secondary, even though they face good receivers. He's going to do something. They got Julius Irvin out there. But when it's all said and done, this game should be over pretty close to halftime, and Mater Dei is going to rev up and get after it. But what's your thoughts on this rivalry, Scott?
You know what? I so much going into this one. You can say so much for the Big A, because I think this is the first time that this game is not going to be played at Anaheim Stadium since actually the last time Mater Dei Servite snapped their 20 plus game losing streak. I'm off the top of my head. It had to be maybe 5 seasons ago. But the reason for being, I guess, they just decided there was lack of fan attendance for the last few games, and it just didn't justify having to get that rental price and I guess the rivalry. I mean, it's still a rivalry, but I guess it just hasn't been the less than stellar. It's been more lopsided in the last few years since they've snapped the streak. But if you go back to last season, there was 58-16 was the final on that one. Mater Dei coming out on top, and then that was a game JT completed 92% and 6 touchdowns. And all Servite had was a one-man show by the name of Kyle Ford, who had his coming out party, with 9 catches for 178 and 2 touchdowns, but he's no longer there, as we know. Servite, they've been giving up a lot of points lately. I mean, they're giving up 43 points a game in Trinity League, so look for that to continue. And with this one, I think MD's going to be on top, and I'm going to say the same thing, 51-17.
Okay, I think that sounds pretty. I think that sounds all right. Yeah, Servite hasn't won this game since 2011. I think they won it back to back 2010 and 11. I'm not sure beyond that. But they, Friars did get on a little roll there with Coach Thomas there. And let's see, 2011, that game was played at Angel Stadium where the Friars won, and I'd have to go back and check out 2010 here real quick. But that was, again, played at Angel Stadium, and it was Servite 21-14. So, it's definitely shifted the last couple of years, and so I would expect Mater Dei to get big, and maybe if Servite can continue progress, it's certainly great for these kids to play at Angel Stadium. I think fans like going there. It's always great to see the high school kids get a chance to play in that game, and before maybe they play in a big game in CIF, it's a memorable occasion. Even if they don't go on, they remember that they played in the pro stadium.
Yeah, I mean, for the kids playing on that that field and having a sense in a big stadium, I know from a fan standpoint, I know it's you're further away from the action.
Yeah.
You're not on top of it. But I mean, I think because it's a rivalry, and everybody kind of makes it an event. In addition to the football game itself. But I guess just like I said, I guess you have to draw the line somewhere when they were only they weren't getting more than 9,000 people.
Yeah.
You might as well have that even played in the Santa Ana Bowl or Cerritos. So
yeah,
I think that was the reasoning for that.
Why do you think this rivalry is so passionate, Scotty? What's your take on what brings it out in modern day Surrey, where it's been a very dominant, obviously the last 25, 30 years, it's been very dominant ever since Coach Rollinson got going at modern day. That was probably the signal of this the dominance switch to modern day. But what drives this rivalry in your opinion?
I think that's the key. It's been it's all parochial school rivalry, and I know the times in the last couple of years have changed the dynamics of high school football, as we've mentioned before. But I think because Rollinson's still there, that I think that it's made the rivalry interesting.
Right.
And I know a lot of the chatter between the kids. They've had sometimes they've had some transfers go over to Servite.
Sure.
There's been a couple of Servite kids coming over to Modern Day in the past, and it's all these kids know each other from their feeder parochial schools. So I think in that aspect it for a while there, up until Troy Thomas came along, I think when it was that 20 game winning streak that Modern Day had, and as we all know, all winning streaks end up coming to an end, and it just happened to be I think Servite ended up winning 2 in a row, if I'm not mistaken, before Modern Day has rolled off, I think 5 or 6 maybe. But it's still always going to be a rivalry as long as I know, as long as Rollo's there. I think it's going to be a rivalry. Until there's somebody else different. I know Servite's had different coaches come through there, and it may not be so much on their end. They may not stress it as much. But I just know that as long as the old guard is still there, then it will still always be talked as a big rivalry. Yeah, and then the thing I don't know if you mentioned it was, and the reason Rollinson, he's old guard and he's been there. I mean, he's also, we're talking with Coach Rollinson, he is a Modern Day grad. He is he played at Modern Day, so it's in his blood, and he played against Servite. So I think that's what he for him it was a huge game, and he came up with it a big game, and I think every year he says something about he'll rattle off something, and then about how they're doing, and then he'll always throw it in there right around this time of year, and then there's Servite, and we're going to get ready for, and then we got and he might not always say it so nicely. He's like we're going to kick Servite's butt, or we're going to get fired up for Servite, or we're ready to take these guys on, but he does play it up. I'm sure. I mean, he tells these guys to get fired up because that's how he came up. I'm sure. Yeah, without a doubt. That you said it perfectly. I think that's says it all. And then the Servite can finally say goodbye to having to play against any St. Brown brothers that had I don't know. And Amon-Ra was at one point was at Servite, if I'm correct, right? Yes. Amon-Ra, so they can say goodbye to the St. Browns playing it, but then Modern Day's playing against guys that were at they're playing against Servite guys that were at Modern Day, like Titus Toller and Trent McDuffie. Yep. So that's what some of the things that the crosses that Scotty was talking about. Now, as we end up our show, we thank all the Trinity League football fans for joining us. Want to check in and talk briefly here with Scotty. So the playoff pairings will come out in all the divisions on Sunday afternoon from the CIF Southern section. So we expect, I think Scotty and I, from just talking before the show, we both expect that all 6 Trinity League teams will get into the field. And
basically the reason is that there's 18 teams that are eligible for a 16-team bracket, and that's set. That there's 16 teams in the bracket, and we think there's a couple teams that definitely could get knocked off. I think Alemany is going to be one of those 18 teams. One of the teams coming out of the bracket is going to be Alemany, and then probably maybe one of the teams look for the from the Mission League. Maybe Serra's going to make it, but is Loyola and Notre Dame of Sherman Oaks going to make it? I think one of those teams falls, and I think even a winless team in Orange Lutheran, perhaps they'll still be 500. That's not necessarily a requirement, but I think they're going to have enough to get in. They have some pretty important victories. A couple of teams that are struggling in the Trinity League, like for example, Orange Lutheran, they beat Vista Marietta early in the year. That's a lower level type Division I team. They're going to look at the at-large formula, where they're going to look at strength of league and strength of schedule and wins and losses and any kind of head-to-heads where things like that Vista Marietta game could come up. But Scotty, I know you have some thoughts, maybe some predictions on what you think perhaps Mater Dei will draw in the first round. That's kind of fun to see what the top seed could do. But I think I like to hear about that and any thoughts if on what you think about all 6 Trinity League teams getting in.
Yeah, they're going to all pretty much, I think, get in. It's just a matter of, I think, the at-large bids or where they're going to place. And I know we were talking more about Orange Lutheran, and I think Orange Lutheran's going to get in, and I think they will be the last team to get in, and I think they're probably going to get Centennial.
Oh wow!
So, and then if you're thinking then the next 2 teams would be Vista Marietta, and I think we were talking Serra. So Mater Dei, I think, will either get Serra or Vista Marietta, based on how they did, shuffle those out, because Olu can't play Mater Dei because they're coming out of the same league, so they got to bump them down. So they're most likely probably going to get Centennial. So, and then as far as everybody else goes, and then it's just a matter of when matching up, the at-large with, or the league number 2 teams and the number 3 teams. But I still think, I know we were talking about this earlier too. I think Santa Margairita is going to be put on Mater Dei's side. Yeah, that would be interesting to see, because I think Mission's going to be on that side, so you may see that Mission Santa Margairita matchup, and then, they could have, then you can, possibly have, if Mater Dei will be playing, either Santa Margairita or Mission. Those are just some of the things that I've just kind of, thrown out there, but, we'll all know on Sunday what really happens. So.
Yeah, and if you really want to study up on some of these teams that we're talking about, check out the Mission League standings, which is another private school, areas like West Hills, La Puente, Gardena, LA with Sherman Oaks, Mission Hills, and that whole group, that has a lot of these teams that we're talking about, and then some of the familiar faces. So if you want to see some scores, but there's some big games in Division I this week. With the Mission Viejo San Clemente is a big game in the South Coast, and I think the thing I hope fans have taken. Both Scotty and I are pretty high in Santa Margairita as a dangerous playoff team. We'll see if the Lancers. If the Eagles can continue that this week against the Lancers. They're going into the playoffs with a lot of momentum. They could be a scary team. You guys all should know how Mater Dei and Bosco are totally legit and dangerous teams. But watch out for Santa Margairita. And we'll see if JSerra can get healthy and get going again, and they can play clean. They could be a scary team if things all come together for them. And we'll see what state Servite and Olu are, and how difficult a playoff draw those teams get. But and then be sure to tune in to us next week as we do our finale show, where we'll have our final grades for the season. We'll have our awards, and we'll have some playoff previews. So we are finishing strong here on the Trinity League Football Podcast. And Scotty, how much are you looking forward to seeing the red Mater Dei Monarchs taking on those black Servite Friars in their black uniforms?
Just another game to get under the belt. I just like to see a good game, and hopefully everybody comes out healthy on both sides. That's all you can ever ask for. And then just then I'll just be scoreboard watching. So.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot to watch, and I think a lot of fans will be doing exactly what Scotty will be, checking out these scores, coming up with their brackets, and so it'll be fun time. So, Scotty, enjoy that game. I think I'm going to be outside the Trinity League this week. I'm going to be checking out the Empire League. I'm going to see the Empire League final between Pacifica and Valencia, and I'm going to check out that game. I was debating, do I check out Servite Mater Dei? I've been covering a lot of Trinity League. Villa Park Yorba Linda is a good game. Let's see what else was good. Troy Fullerton could be an interesting game. Santa Margarita. any of the Trinity League teams. Maybe JSerra, Bosco. San Clemente Mission. Steve Fryer is going to be that one. Covering the OC-Register will be Steve Fryer at Mission Viejo. So I'm going to be checking out some other guys. But I think wherever you are, whatever fan you are, or whatever league you're out there on Friday nights, you're probably seeing some fun stuff. And so Scotty, enjoy that game, and thanks again for joining us.
As always, Dan. As always, we're ready to go, and looking forward to seeing what we got coming out on pairings on Sunday.
Yes, sir. So for Scott Barajas, I'm Dan Albano with the Orange County Register, and thanks for joining us on the Trinity League Football Podcast.